So we're recording now. So the first part that we're going to go through is all about the assessment of learning. Now, assessment is part of evaluation. Okay, so just to talk you through, it's one of the ways that we evaluate the success of a training program and how the transference of learning has happened with regards to training. Sometimes the term assessment and evaluation, trainers can incorrectly use them interchangeably, okay? So whereas assessment is a part of evaluation, it's certainly not the only part of evaluation, okay? So it would, when we get on to talking about evaluation in a second, and we talk about the different, Kirkpatrick has 4 different levels of evaluation, it would come into level 2 of your evaluation of training, but it's certainly not the only mechanism. So I just want to make that very, very clear at the outset. It's a part of evaluation, but it is certainly not the only part of evaluation. So moving on. What we're going to do for our learning outcomes. So at the end of this session, you should be able to identify the purpose of assessment. You should be able to explain the various different types of assessment. So we've different types of assessment. We formative assessment or we summative assessment. So we'll go through all of those. You'll then be able to discuss a range of assessment methods and techniques, and this will be important as well for your project to say how you're going to assess people's learning. You'll be able to devise an appropriate assessment strategy to assess trainees' learning and to determine if training needs were met and if objectives were fulfilled. You will be able to explain the objective and subjective nature of various assessment techniques. And finally, you'll be able to discuss issues surrounding assessment reliability, validity, and fairness. About 12 slides long, as I said to you, so we're expecting an awful lot out of the 12 slides. So, first thing to remember is that your assessment is a very important feature of a training intervention, and it's to assess the learning and how the learning has actually how it has happened, how trainees have learned, and all of that. It's either ignored sometimes. So if you even think back yourselves on a lot of training sessions that you'd have been a part of and that you'd have been involved in, I can say, I would imagine you'd be able to think off the top of your head a lot of sessions that actually had no assessment element whatsoever. Now, assessment doesn't always have to be a sit-down exam or anything too formal. We can assess as we're going along as well through informally asking questions, observations, things like that. However, sometimes with regards to assessment, it's either ignored or it's treated as a box ticking exercise. So people don't do it at all, or they just do it for the sake of it. If we're not assessing and if we're not thinking about how have people learned, what have they learned, how can they transfer this into a working environment, we need to kind of think look at the point of, well, what was the point in training in the first place if we don't care about the information that the students are taking out of the training session with them. Some practitioners, as I've said to you, use the word assessment and evaluation interchangeably, and whereas you'd say, God, she's really on her soapbox about this tonight. Assessment is a part of evaluation. It is certainly not the only mechanism of evaluation. When we get on to that a little bit later, you will see what I mean with regards to it.
Okay.
Sorry. So the purpose of assessment then, why do we bother, doing assessment? The first thing is that we want to see if our objectives and our learning outcomes have been achieved. So if I was to say to you now, can anybody tell me the 4 stages in the systematic training process? You should be in a place where you should be telling me. If not, something has happened along the way. So if I have taught the class and if I have gone through all the material and we've covered everything in the learning outcomes, and if people aren't getting the answer to the question or they're not passing the assessment, something has happened in the meantime. Maybe I didn't explain it properly. Maybe I didn't give over enough time to it. But it's a great opportunity for us to test if the objectives have been achieved. It also gives a great opportunity to identify the level of learning acquired by individual trainees. So let's say, for example, going back to one of your earlier assignments, if every single one of you got one question wrong, I would then need to reflect back and say, there was something that I did wrong in relation to the training session there, because nobody grasped the concept, nobody understood it. Whereas if one or two people got it, got it wrong or didn't have a full grasp of the concept, but the majority of the class had it, you would then be saying that, okay, people got it in the majority, but maybe I need to spend a little bit more time on it. So you can identify the level of learning that the trainees have acquired as well. Who knows it in depth? If people only know a little bit about it, again, you need to spend more time on it. So it's a method of evaluation for the trainer as well. It also gives you the opportunity to provide feedback to your trainees, to show them where they need to do a little bit of extra work, where they need to give a little bit of extra focus. And again, linking in, and this goes back to what I was saying in my previous couple of points, is it provides information about the design and effectiveness of the training activities. As I said, as trainers, we need to constantly reflect back and see how effective our training has been. Is there anything that we need to change around the training? I know I've used the example with you previously around when I delivered the employment law training, where that on reflection, I needed to reorder the subjects that we were covering in what order, based on feedback, based on results. So it gives you the opportunity to reflect back about the design on the training as well. And this is where, if you think of our systematic training process as the continuous loop, the identify, design, deliver, and evaluate, we're now going back around here and we're saying, okay, we need to make a couple of changes, we need to make a couple of tweaks. So that's where the continuous cycle comes in, and that's where we indicate any adjustments to the program design. Or it might not be the program design, it might be the delivery. So it's to see where there is any room for improvement. Everyone okay with that so far?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Stop me up along the way if you do have any questions or anything like that. So moving on then towards our various different types of assessment. So you have what's known as a diagnostic assessment. And this is a form of pre-assessment that allows a teacher or a trainer to determine students' individual strengths, weaknesses, knowledge, and skills prior to the instruction. So it's primarily used to diagnose student difficulties and to guide lesson and curriculum planning. And it's useful for making decisions about whether an individual is suited to undertaking a particular type of learning program as well. So this is where you're seeing, do they have kind of the aptitude that's required of the program? Do they have the skill level that they should have at this point? Sometimes if it's kind of, shall we say, practical training that somebody is doing, they may require them to do a bit of a pre-test to see, do they have the general aptitude for it? Do they have the skills for it? And that's how then they make up the decision as to whether someone is suited for that type of a program. Okay. You then have, so that's your diagnostic. So you then have your formative assessment, and this is where you measure your trainees' progress. So it's ongoing during the training situation, and it highlights aspects of the trainees' performance that require adjustment to ensure that they achieve the targeted standard. So you're not just teaching them something and there's an exam at the end, or a demonstration at the end. They have the opportunity throughout the program to practice whatever it is that they're being trained on, to be observed, to receive feedback on it, so that they know how to perfect it in order to achieve the standard that's required to pass the program at the other end. So that's formative. That's as you're going along within the program. And then finally, you have a summative assessment. And this is where you look at testing the trainees' learning against a set of objectives. So this is where you're saying, these are our objectives, this is what we set out to do, and the assessment techniques would be designed with the learning objectives in mind, to see, can somebody do objective 1, can somebody do objective 2, can somebody do objective 3, and so on. They're commonly carried out at the end of a training intervention and may be focused on a specific range of tasks. So they would wait till the very, very end of, of a module or of the training program. And they provide useful information about the trainees' learning from a training activity, but can also highlight the effectiveness or otherwise of the activity itself. So again, going back to the point, if people don't know what they're doing at the end, something happened along the way within the training. If people are really, really good, and if everybody has grasped it, it demonstrates that something really positive happened as part of the training. So it gives you the opportunity then at the end to really reflect back and see what worked, see maybe what needs a little bit more work on. So there are your three types of assessments. You have your diagnostic, your formative, and your summative assessment. Sometimes it might be a situation that you don't have the opportunity to decide. So let's say if you're delivering any QQI programs, you won't be given the choice. You'll be told what kind of an assessment it's going to be, whether it's going to be a summative assessment, whether it's formative as you go along, but it will be outlined to you within the module descriptor, the assessment that you're going to do. If you're developing maybe a program yourself that there's no accreditation with it, but you still want to have some level of assessment, you have the freedom to decide yourself whether it's going to be the diagnostic assessment, whether it's going to be the formative assessment or the summative assessment at the end. Okay? Is that okay with everybody?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Can I just ask, there's only ever one method though, is there?
Of assessment?
Of assessment, do you like, can I just choose a summative assessment as my example?
You can, of course, yeah. So you can just pick one. You can pick one. Sometimes it might be a mixture of all of them. So let's say I'm trying to think of an example to give you. The welders who used to always be making noise next door to us when we used to be in our classroom, they would have to do a diagnostic assessment. So they actually have to do, it's nearly like an entrance exam for want of a better word. So they have to go in and do a practical test prior to being accepted onto the program, that they can show that they actually have the dexterity and the ability to be able to excel at that. Throughout the program then, they would be sorry?
No, it's okay.
So they would have the diagnostic assessment at the beginning there to see if they can actually get onto the program or if they have the skills. During the program then, they would have their formative assessment, so that they would be given various different tasks to do, and then their tutor, their tutor or their trainer would constantly be looking at the quality of the work, and they'd be saying to them, no, that's not up to standard, you need to improve on that. The standard needs to be higher, and giving them some help and some guidance and some feedback in relation to it. And then finally, they would also have a summative assessment where they would have to weld a piece of equipment or do something like that would potentially be tested by an external to make sure that they're meeting the standards that are required and that they have met the objectives. So that's one program where you would have all the various different types of assessment, but equally you might have a program that just has the summative assessment. So it kind of depends on the requirements of the program, what it is that you're delivering as well. But anything hands-on and anything practical, they will typically have two types. So they'd have the formative as you're going through, and then the summative at the end. But if it's maybe a knowledge-based training or information, it will typically tend to just be the summative at the end to see what people have learned. Does that answer your question okay, Mary?
It does, yeah, thanks a million, yeah.
No problem. Any other questions or anything on that?
No. No. Okay.
Perfect. So when we've spoken now about the three different kind of types of assessment, we're now moving on to your assessment methods. So as I said to you earlier, they don't necessarily have to be, it doesn't have to be a formal exam. It doesn't have to be a written exam. It doesn't have to be anything like that. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. So the common assessment techniques would be things like verbal questioning. You can just have a section of your class at the end that you say, we're going to leave 10 minutes at the end of the program or 10 minutes at the end of the session where I'll ask a couple of questions and I'll see, are people answering me? Are people stumbling? Are people not sure? Are they very, very sure? So that's your very kind of informal assessment technique then. You may be required to, and again, it depends on the kind of program that you're delivering and the expectations of the program. You may be required to have a written test for your, for your students. So again, sometimes in QQI programs, there's an expectation that there's a written exam or a written test at the end of it. You may be expected to design those questions, but remember, again, for any of your assessments that you're doing, tie them back to your objectives. Always link your assessment back to your objective, okay, or your learning outcomes, and that's where you create the link between those. Thirdly, as another assessment method, you would have a skills-based assessment. So this is your demonstration of competence. This is where you're actually able to weld the piece of equipment, or you're able to, I'm trying to think of any other practical type of training. You're able to whack somebody's eyebrows properly. You're not going to take them clean off their face. So you're actually showing that you're competent to carry out the skill that it is that you're doing. And always when you're training in a skill, there will always be, and there should always be, some sort of a skills demonstration at the end of it to make sure that people are able to carry out the skill that they have been taught, and that they're able to do it competently. Next, you have maybe trying to identify an attitudinal change. And again, this is one of the most difficult learnings to assess, purely because of the fact, as we know with our knowledge, skills and attitude, your attitudinal change is the hardest to bring about, and it's also the hardest to assess. So it may only be through things like observation over a period of time that you would identify if somebody has had an attitudinal change as a result of the training. It is important here to remember as well to offer a variety of learnings in the way, of a variety of assessment methods in the way they demonstrate learning, because some people can be fantastic at assignments. They can immerse themselves really into it, and that they would spend their lives researching if they could. Equally, you have people who maybe hate writing assignments but might excel at a skills demonstration, or who might excel at an exam. So it's important that you have a balance of various different assessment methods. If you take yourselves, for example, you'll have had 2 written assignments, 2 projects, a skills demonstration, and a learner log. So you will have 3 different assessment techniques. 4. You'll have 4 different assessment techniques by the time the program is finished. And again, it's to give people the opportunity in the areas that they excel in, that it's not all weighted towards one type of an assessment method. Again, that's fine if you have time, but if you're only going in and you're delivering short, snappy training, it mightn't be possible to do that. So again, what I'm outlining to you here is best practice. It's what's outlined that should be happening, but it's not always practical either. Like if you have a 2-hour training session, and if you don't have to have an exam, you're not going to outline and leave over a big lot of time towards a written test at the end. It might be more appropriate to do some verbal questioning and to go through it from an informal perspective that way. So really it depends on the training that you're delivering. It depends on the subject that's being trained on. It depends on the expectations of the person that is going in and that has invited you in to do the training, and their expectations of it as well. So it's to weigh all of those up when you're deciding on your various different assessment methods. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so then from some of these might look quite familiar to you. So from a CTAC or from a QQI assessment technique, these are the 6 types of assessment technique that QQI will always use. They will never deviate away from this. And if you are ever delivering QQI program, it will outline to you what you need to do. You need to have a skills demonstration, you need to have an assessment, you need to have this, that, or the other. But they will be very, very prescriptive in telling you exactly what you need to do for how many marks. It's not something you get to make the decision on yourself, unfortunately. Okay? So you have things like an examination. Fairly straightforward. This is where you have a written exam at the end of a module or at the end of a program. Secondly, you may have to do a portfolio, or what they also refer to sometimes as a collection of work. And this is where you would have various different pieces of work to do that you build into a portfolio, but that each of them will kind of be standalone. So let's say, for example, on the supervisory management program, they have to do a collection of work. They have to do things like a budget. They have to do I'm trying to think now off the top of my head, a code of conduct. They have to write a small training program, but it's all for the one organization that they have to do it on. So each of the pieces are standalone, but together they create a portfolio or a collection of work. Okay. Then you have your assignment, which is fairly straightforward. You're tried and tested in those at this stage. So again, they'll outline to you the word count and all the information in relation to that. Project, again, I'm preaching to the choir here with regards to the project. You all know what's expected in relation to those. And then you have things like your skills demonstration. So from your perspective, it's a presentation. In other instances, you may have to do an interview. Again, you may have to do a presentation. You may have to do, I know in the HR program, they have to do a disciplinary interview. So again, it's to demonstrate that you have the skill to do this piece of work. And then finally, you have your learner record, which is like about, as you said, as you saw, you have the couple of questions that you have to answer on, but there's also a self-reflective piece on those as well. So they're the assessment methods that are outlined by QQI, and they're the ones that they utilize across all their programs. And as I said to you, there'll be a mixture of them. There'll rarely be all 6 of them, thank God. But sometimes you might get that type of a situation. But even if you think for yourselves, like you've 4 of them ticked off ticked off it there from the perspective of your assignment, your project, your skills demonstration, and your learner records. The rationale behind it, as I said, is to give people across the board the opportunity to excel in the various different assessment techniques. Further assessment factors then to take into consideration would be things like, if you're using any exams or any questions, be they informal questions or formal type questions, you need to consider whether they're objective tests or subjective tests, okay? And just to kind of talk you through a little bit about the subjective tests and the objective tests. Objective tests are very, very easy. They're right or wrong. The answer is either right or it's wrong. There is no scope, there's no gray area. So these would be kind of on an exam, if you've done one in the past, your short questions, where it's where it's very, very definitive in the answer. You either know it or you don't. Mm-hmm. Your subjective tests are then more about where you're asked to critique or contrast and compare, and where there's maybe no right or wrong answer with them. It's how you present your argument, and it's how you present the information. So what I could believe is right, you mightn't agree with me, but it's how you put both parts forward. Now, the issue with that as well is whoever is marking it, there is more scope for subjectivity with the marking as well. So it's something that you need to just be mindful of when you're designing assessment methods. Okay?
Yeah.
There's 3 other factors then to take into consideration, is around reliability, validity, and fairness. Okay? The first thing is, how reliable is your assessment method? So the reliability refers to the extent to which it consistently and accurately measures the learning. So if I ask you questions today and I ask another class the same questions tomorrow, and another class the same questions next week. It should be consistently and accurately measuring the same learning all the time. So it should be a very, very reliable tool for me to utilize as part of an assessment. So the results here should pertain irrespective of who is responsible for marking the assessment. So whether I mark it or whether a colleague of mine marks it or somebody from up in Dublin who also delivers the program, you should get the same marks. And that's about how reliable the tool is. Secondly, you have the validity side of things. And this is where you need to, it's considered valid if it actually measures what it's intended to measure. So if I'm looking at to see, do you know the 4 stages of the systematic training process? And then I say to you, okay, can someone tell me about the, can somebody tell me what a summative assessment is? It's not valid because that's not what I should be asking you at all. I should be asking you what are the 4 steps of the systematic training process. So it needs to measure what it actually intends to measure. There's several types of validity then. So there's face validity, so on the face of it, how valid it is. Content validity, so how valid the content is with regards to it. And construct validity is all about how the questions are, the assessment questions are constructed, how the tool is constructed, again, to make sure that it's as valid as possible and that we are measuring exactly what it is that we need to be measuring. And then finally on this part is about fairness. The fairness piece as well is where everyone undertaking the assessment has an equal chance of getting a good assessment, regardless of any of the equality areas that we would have spoken about last week, gender, that somebody, that it's not weighted more in favor of somebody else. So it doesn't matter who does the assessment, everybody has an equal chance of getting a good assessment. And this also has the implications for marking assessments as well. If you think, one of the ones I always use as an example for this would be the Leaving Cert. Like, it should be reliable. It should be that no matter where your paper is corrected, you get the same marks, even if it's corrected, if it goes to Galway or if it's in Waterford or wherever, you should be getting the same marks. The question should be asked to actually measure what you've been taught, and it should be really, really fair. It shouldn't matter where you've gone to school. It shouldn't matter anything like that, that you have the same opportunity to get a good mark when it comes to the assessment side of things. Okay, any questions on those?
No.
Nope. Okay.
No.
So to sum up,
No.
at this point, you should be able to, don't worry, I'm not going to ask you any informal questions or anything like that. You should be able to identify the purpose of assessment. You should be able to outline why we do assessment. You should be able to explain the different types of assessment. So as we've gone through, we have the diagnostic assessment, the formative assessment, and the summative assessment. You should be able to discuss a range of assessment methods and techniques. You should be able to devise an appropriate assessment strategy to test trainees' learning and to determine if training needs were met and objectives fulfilled. So if you are thinking now for your own skills demonstration or for any training that you're going to be doing going forward, you should now be able to say, well, a skills demonstration is appropriate because they're doing something practical. Or I don't want a formal exam because people might panic. It's enough for me to ask informal and verbal questions. You should be able to explain the objective and subjective nature of various assessment techniques, and you should be, as we've discussed, issues surrounding assessment, reliability, validity, and fairness. Okay, so that's the whole area with regards to your assessing learning. Okay, so as I've said to you, assessment is part of evaluation, but it's not the only part of training evaluation. So we might move into the training evaluation piece now. Does anyone have any questions on the assessment of learning or anything like that so far? No?
No.
Vicky, with me, I'm just wondering, question 5, when we have to give examples of the assessment of learning documents.
Yes. You will have to have a couple of questions, or you'll have to have an observation checklist, or you'll have to have something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So I'm going to go through the whole project overview with you afterwards as well, and just give you a couple of pointers as to what you need to do for, you know, for each part.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So, can everyone see training evaluation now? I just want to make
Yeah.
sure you can all see it, that I'm sharing it properly.
Yeah.
Okay. So for our training evaluation, this is the last part of the systematic training process, and it's the last piece, shall we say, of the jigsaw, or of the continuous loop. Okay. I've outlined to you previously with regards to training evaluation. Sometimes this is the piece of training that's seen as a bit like your training needs analysis. It's a little bit unglamorous. It's not, you know, it's not the limelight part of the training, or it's maybe not the fun part of the training where you're getting involved with your students and you're dealing with them. And it's more the background work. However, it's equally as important, because if we're constantly looking at improving our training sessions and improving the content that we're delivering, without doing our training evaluation, we're never going to know what we have to improve on. If we have to improve on anything, we're not going to know what's actually working really, really well. Because I'm conscious that I'm always talking about what we need to improve, but you're not going to know what's working really well, what the students really enjoy, what you might be able to do a little bit more of. And by doing your training evaluation, you're going to find out these pieces of information. Yes, we can do our self-reflection, and we can look and we can say, yeah, this worked really well, or no, this didn't work well. But it's good to hear it back from the students as well. What you might find didn't go well, the students might have really, really enjoyed. So you might just be being a little bit critical of yourself. So the evaluation is a really, really key piece, because without it, we can't perfect the design, we can't perfect the delivery, we can't see, did the gap that we identified as being our training gap, has that been resolved and has it been fixed? So,
Could I just make a point?
You can, of course, Paul.
This is Paul Desmond here. With our fire training at the end of a session, we would always have a kind of an open discussion of where we could work on the next time, and he always takes that away then and add, if we need to work on we'll say hydrants, he'll go away then and he'll add that into the next session, because we only do 6 sessions a year, so that's what he would add in, you know, and it's very beneficial, because like it was taken on board then, you know.
Yeah, and he's looking to see what you need to do. You feel that you're able to feed back to him as to know we need to spend a little bit more time on this, and he's able to make those changes as he's going through, rather, shall we say, than wait until the end of his 6th session and saying what could we have done differently. So he's doing that as he's going through the whole process. So that's a really, really good example.
What he would always say himself then is, he would say, like, we're actually providing the subject for the next training, you know.
Yeah, and it's year training as well, and you'll get out of it what you put into it, type of thing.
Exactly. Thanks.
Great stuff. Okay, so at the end of this, your final piece of content, I suppose, before I go and start boring you all about about the project and going back into this piece. And I know it's been a very, I suppose, random kind of a road and a bit of a diversion that we've taken in relation to it. So at the end of this, you will be able to discuss the reasons why training evaluation should be undertaken. So why should we bother with it? And you'll also be able to identify, explain, and assess a range of training evaluation models, techniques, and approaches. Now, you'll see within the sample project that I have given you Kirkpatrick's model that I'm utilising as part of that. That was purely only my own decision. If I was evaluating training, it's Kirkpatrick's model that I would use. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, or it's the only model to use. What I'm saying is that's the one that I identify with. It's a little bit like your 4-step, 6-step, and 8-step for your training needs analysis model. Some of them are more appropriate than others. Some you will resonate more with others. So if you like one model, go with that one. Pick one that you're really going to immerse yourself into, because not only do you need it for your project, but going forward into the training arena, you may be asked to evaluate training programs. You need to do it for yourself, so you need to identify what kind of model that you're going to utilize yourself. But we'll go through all of those now. So as I said, delivery, sometimes when people get to training, they think, oh my God, that's great, it's delivered, now it's done. And they see that as the end point of a training cycle. And if only that were true, to be fantastic. They also see delivering the training or designing the training as the starting point. But as we know, there's a big chunk of work to be done before that. So your training doesn't end when you end the delivery. Your training ends after you've done the evaluation piece, after you've looked and seen, what needs to be improved. However, it can be viewed as unglamorous and time consuming and, a little bit more kind of admin based work than the kind of the funner side of training. Those responsible for organising and or delivering a training event may have reasons to suppress information about its effectiveness as well. Sometimes I always feel, if I've ever been at a training session and I think, God, if it hasn't been great, and it's not that I would have a go at somebody for the sake of it, but sometimes you want to give really useful feedback, and I would always be an advocate to say to people, be honest in your feedback to a trainer as well. Don't just have a go at them, but be honest with them as well, because sometimes people aren't. They'll tick all the boxes and they'll go through it. But sometimes you will look at trainers and they will never give an evaluation sheet. They'll never do that, because maybe they've got bad evaluation sheets in the past and they just don't want to go there again. So sometimes they just think, I'm not going to bother with the evaluation, it'll be fine. And they may not be, they may just be marking time, and they don't want people to, to know that they're not giving it everything that they had in the past. So they may have a reason to keep the information down and to suppress it. An organisation as well may not have a training specialist or anybody else with the expertise to actually review the evaluation sheets and to compile them down and to make a report and see what needs to be improved. So they're the kind of the reasons that sometimes that evaluation wouldn't be carried out. So there are, if you put in training evaluations into Google, again, you'd be met with 100,000 different definitions. However, there are various definitions, but they all kind of have the same implications, and they are such that evaluation should be seen as an ongoing process. It does not end at the end of a training event only. So you need to be constantly evaluating. If you're designing the training, you need to maybe be looking at a little bit of an evaluation piece there. The delivery of a training. You can evaluate yourself at various different stages of the delivery of the training as well. Your evaluation of training as well should be directed towards specific goals and objectives. So you're not just evaluating if the group liked you or if you got on with them. You're evaluating, did they meet the objectives? Did we meet our goals? Did they meet what they wanted to get? Did we cover all the content? Did I give them as much information as I possibly could? Did I give them too much information? So it needs to be specific. Your evaluation needs to be specific in relation to goals and objectives. It's also about the use of your data gathering techniques designed to examine particular aspects of the learning process. So you're back around to your questionnaires, your observations. Paul, the example that you used there about, about the guy who does the fire training with you, that's a little bit of a focus group that he's having with you at the end of a training to see what it is that you'd like to do. He's not necessarily naming it as a focus group, but that's what it kind of is that he's utilizing that opportunity to get that evaluation piece from you, to gather his data, to evolve his training going forward for the next session. It requires the use of accurate and appropriate measuring instruments, again, to collect the information for decision making, and is not only concerned with the evaluation of trainees, but with the wider training system as a whole. So it's not just about the trainees and about how they got on within the training situation. It's about the wider training system. It's about things like the room, the setup, the design of the training. Was more time needs to be spent on it. So it's absolutely encapsulating everything that's involved in the wider training system. So there's a bit of an infographic there with regards to a brief history of evaluation. So you can see I've mentioned Kirkpatrick already. He brought around his model of evaluation in 1959. So his model has 4 levels. The first level is your reaction, and they're your evaluation sheets. So that reaction level is the evaluation sheets that a trainer would typically hand around at the end of a training session. The second level is your learning. So this is where you're looking at, how many people passed, maybe it's pass and fail, how many people passed, how many people failed, how many people got distinctions. You're looking at that, or even you're looking at from an informal perspective, people weren't sure of this concept, or people weren't sure of that topic, or they really, grasp the concept of this one. Thirdly, then you're looking at behavior. Now, your behavior is a little bit more challenging to evaluate, because if you think, let's take ourselves here with the training and development program, for example, we can do the reaction, we can do the learning, but overall, I have apart from seeing your skills demonstration, but again, that's the learning piece, that's level 2. I don't know, and I will have no observation, or I won't be able to do any form of evaluation when you get to the behavior side of things to see, are you putting in place what you learned? So sometimes you're not always able to do that piece. If you're working in an organization, you have more opportunity to do it, but you're looking to see, has the training made a difference? Has it changed behavior? Has it improved? Has it improved any behavior or anything like that? And then finally, you're looking at results. So if you think back to your cost-benefit analysis that we went through a couple of weeks ago, you should then be looking at after the training, and you're looking at what money have we saved? Have we saved the money that we thought we would as part of the cost-benefit analysis? You're looking then at the results of the training and how successful it was. So he would have been the first to propose anything around, evaluation of training, and this would have been back in 1959, as I said. Moving on then towards the 1960s, you have the approaches to evaluation were mooted, and you looked at things like training program improvement, and making decisions about trainees, administrative decisions around training as well, and decisions concerning training variables. We'll be going through all the other levels as well when we get there. You then had Hamlin's 5 levels, and it doesn't kind of take a genius to figure out that he has utilized an awful lot of what Kirkpatrick went through in the 4 levels and just added on and added on various different steps to it. So if you see there, his reaction and learning are the first 2 methods, the same as Kirkpatrick. And then moving on, you have organizational effects. So what effects do the organization have on the evaluation of the training, on the success of it going back into the organization? We all know of situations, or we've heard of situations, where people will go away, they learn something in a training environment, they want to go back and implement it in work, they're not given the opportunity to do so, they're not supported to bring it back, and these would be the organizational effects there. You have then your job behavior, so again it's going back to the behavior piece, and the ultimate value or your results. So there's a huge correlation between the two models there. You then have your responsive model, and that was proposed by Skate in 1975, and then we're going towards the War's 0 model. Again, we're going to go into more detail on the 0 model a little bit later on, which was all about looking at the context. So the context of the training, was it appropriate? The input. So what kind of did the appropriate inputs go into it? Did the right inputs go into it? Were we missing a key input? the reaction to the training. So again, you're looking at how people felt about the training, what they, what they'd change about it, and the outcome. Okay, so that's the CRO, the CIRO, and the outcome of the training. How successful was it? Did it bridge the gap that was identified? And that was in 1978. And then you have in 1979, you had Barish's 6 stages, which is here you're looking at things like your client needs, your structured composition, so how structured was the training, evaluative dimensions, so you're looking at all the different dimensions and all the different parts that you're going to evaluate, any questions that you may have had arising out of the evaluation, the statistics related to it, and again, you're talking here about things that are very, very, very measurable around statistics. As we know, sometimes that's not always the case in training if we're talking about more the softer skills or the unmeasurables. And then finally, you have the reporting that way. So that's just a brief history of the early on stages of evaluation. And as I said, Kirkpatrick still nowadays is seen very much as, he's still seen as kind of one of the greats when it comes to evaluation. So why bother? We've spoken about all those men again, like we spoke about all the men at the beginning. Why do we bother evaluating? The first thing is that it's very important for us to measure if the outcomes of a training event are in line with the set objectives. So this is what we set out to achieve. Have we actually achieved it? You're also then looking at finding your trainees' levels of satisfaction with a range of elements related to the training program. Remember, with your evaluation sheets and stuff like that, it's not always about the content either. It'll be about the room, the setup, the time, the duration, all of those various different factors come into it as well. Because the content might be perfect, but you might be spending too long on it or too short. So this is how we identify this as well. It looks at determining the effectiveness of a specific training event and the ways that it might be improved. So what suggestions would you have for improving the training event? You're looking at determining if the training event was the best way to address the performance gap or development opportunity. So going back to what we spoke about, identifying the gaps and designing your training, was it actually the best way? Could it have been resolved another way? Deciding whether or not to continue running a specific training event. Maybe there's no need to do it anymore. Maybe the same training is available on a free resource online. Maybe you don't need to keep delivering it. It's looking at measuring the transfer of learning again to the work situation. Adopting a continuous improvement focus. So as trainers, we always need to be improving ourselves. We also, as I said, there's that massive self-reflective piece that you're saying, okay, I could have done this better, I could have done the other better. And it's all about continuous improvement for yourself as well. Because the day that we go in there and we kind of don't care is the day you need to, weigh up your options and think, should I really be training anymore? Because you're supposed to care about your students. You're supposed to want to make it better for them. And each class and each group that you want to go into, you yourself should be improving in relation to all of those as well. It gives you the opportunity to calculate the tangible and intangible benefits and justify that investment in the training and development process. So as we spoke about the cost benefit analysis, you're saying that, okay, we spent 20,000, but we saved 50,000. So you can really justify and you can say that there was a massive benefit in relation to it. And it can also work and link in with informing future training plans and strategies. Maybe people want to go on and do additional training in it. Maybe you've identified somebody within the group that could deliver training in relation to another aspect, or you could work with them in relation to it. So it's to give you an opportunity to think outside the box a little bit as well and see what other kind of training initiatives could come out of this one. Okay, so we have your the 4 different levels there. So the 4 levels are the models of training evaluation. You have your 4 levels of evaluation by Kirkpatrick, which I've spoken to you briefly about. You have the 0 model. Again, I've spoken to you briefly about that. the 5 levels of evaluation model, the return on investment model. Now that wasn't on the infograph purely because of the fact that the data didn't go up that far. So you have the return on investment model, which was put forward by Phillips in 1997, and then you have the SIP, which is another evaluation model put forward by Stuffel-Beam in 2000 and 2007. Okay, so we're going to go through each of those ones now. I've left Kirkpatrick to the end, so I've given you kind of a brief overview of him here, but we're not going to start off with Kirkpatrick here. We're going to start off with some of the other ones, and then I'll finish it off with the Kirkpatrick model that way. Does anyone have any questions so far? Because I know the evaluation side of things can sometimes be a little bit, again, it's the unglamorous stuff, and it can be a little bit theory heavy. But I think probably because of the fact that you have done the training needs analysis and all of that piece, it's not going to be as as complex from that perspective. So does anyone have any questions or anything before I move on and start talking through all the different models? No?
Oh.
No, we're grand. Grand.
Well, I think we'll talk about this later, but on the learner record, Vicky, it talks about the classroom appraisal of the Kirkpatrick approach. So will we just talk about how you you mentioning it here, or was there?
Yeah, exactly. So it's how we spoke about Kirkpatrick and all of that. Absolutely, Mary, you can link that in. And as I said, I'll be doing a little bit more on him now at the end of this. At the end of these slides, I have some more information on Kirkpatrick, so this will link into that one, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, so the zero model. I went through this briefly with you already. So the zero model stands for context, input, reaction, and output. And it's different from the Kirkpatrick models. The main difference between them is that the zero focuses on the measurement taken before and after the training has been carried out. Some practitioners feel that this model is best suited to the training management program. So if you're doing any managing training and stuff like that, as it doesn't account behavior, rather it's not for people working at the lower levels of the organization. So it's more for kind of that management development, that leadership development, that kind of piece. It's not for, shall we say, like your hands-on training, maybe around your manual handling, your fire safety, or any of those. It's not around those. It's at more the next level within within an organization.